Hello guys, and welcome back to my video. So in this video, we are going to continue with the job board application using Flutter Riverpod for state management and Express.js and MongoDB for our backend, right? So in this video, we are going to be implementing Pagination and displaying all the vacancies. So I'm just going to give you a demo. So as you can see, we have all vacancies screen. As you can see, we have this loading linear progress indicator that's showing that we still have more vacancies, right? So if I continue to scroll, you can see that we don't have vacancies, and then you can see that more vacancies are being loaded, right? You can see also another set of vacancies has been loaded, you can see. So we are just going to implement pagination, right? So before we do that, let's go back inside our home screen, and then we should wrap this text, CO text, with a gesture detector, right? So let's just make sure we wrap it with a widget. The widget is just going to be a gesture detector. Right, so we want to listen to when a user taps on this gesture detector, right? So basically what we are simply going to do is so if we go inside our main screen, let's go inside our main screen, right? So we want to create a route inside our main screen, inside our main.dat file. So the route is going to be all vacancies screen. Make sure it checks in the context as a parameter, and then it's going to return all vacancies screen. So inside our screen, if we go inside our vacancies screen folder, let's create a file called all vacancies screen. Do that. All right. So it's going to be a stateless widget, right? Okay, so now let's go back inside our main.dat file, and then let's just call the all vacancies screen. All right, so now that we are done, now let's go inside our all vacancies screen, and then let's turn this into a stateful widget, right? So it's going to be a consumer stateful widget. Right, so let's just make sure, and then we also make sure, since the consumer stateful widget, we also need to change the state to consumer state so that we can access our providers. And let's also make sure that this is also a consumer state. And then let's just import Flutter Riverpod. Okay, so now as you can see, we no longer have those red squiggly lines, right? Right, so inside our build folder right here, we want to get the state of our application. So the state of our application is we're simply going to watch the vacancy controller provider for any state changes. All right, so now that so now that we have this state, what we're simply going to do is let's get rid of this placeholder, and then we are simply going to return the state dot and then we are going to use the when method, right? So what this main when method in Riverpod it allows us to handle when you get the data, if we have the error and if we are still loading. So we just take care of this. So we just call it data. You can even name it to vacancies, right? And then for the error, it takes in an error in the stack trace as a parameter. And then we simply want to return the error text. then we want to pass error.toString. Then when our data is still loading, we simply want to display a load, right? Okay, so let's just display a load. All right. Okay, so now let's just save. And then here, what we simply want to do is we want to turn a notification listener. So we want to return a notification listener. So this notification listener widget is just listens for notifications, right? But we want to turn it into a type of scroll notification. So we want to listen to any changes when the user scrolls our application. Right? So scroll notification, right? Type scroll notification, right? And then here, what we're simply going to do is we have an object called on notification, right? Which is a boolean, right? So on notification, which we are just going to return a function with our scroll information. So now in this method, right, that we have with our scroll information, what we want to do is we want to check if the scroll information dot metrics, right, dot pixels, right? Remember, when we are dealing with screen sizes, we deal with pixels, right? So basically what we're just doing here is we are just checking if the scroll information dot pixels, if the pixels is equal to the max scroll extent, right? So that means that the user is scrolled to the bottom of our screen. So I want to enter that if the user scrolls to the bottom of our screen, right, that means that they have reached the bottom of our screen. We want to load more vacancies if we still have more vacancies in our database, right? So to do that, we'll simply use let's create another let's just create a variable called vacancy that's going to watch any state changes in our vacancy controller, right? Vacancy controller.notify, right? So what we are simply doing here is we want to be, if we go back inside our vacancy controller, we want to be able to access this method right here, the load more method, right? This method for loading more vacancies from our database, right? So to do that, what we simply did here is we simply use the reference.watch, and then we just use vacancy controller provider.notify. So this notifier allows us to access methods inside our vacancy controller, right? As you can see, the first one, we just used the vacancy controller provider. We didn't use the notifier because we just want to watch the state changes of our vacancy controller. But when you want to access the methods inside our vacancy controller, we then use the notifier, right? So what we are simply going to do after this, right? If you use a scroll to the bottom of our screen, now we just want to load more vacancies, right? Vacancy.load more. We just want to load more vacancies, right? So else, if we don't have any, if the user hasn't scrolled to the bottom of our screen, we will just return false. Just return false. And then this notification listener also takes in a child. So in this case, the child is going to be a refresh indicator, right? So it's going to be a refresh indicator. So if we go back to our application, as you can see from our application with all vacancy screen, all these vacancies, right? As you can see, we have this nice refresh indicator appearing at the top there. So that's what we want to appear, this black refresh indicator, right? So the child is going to be a refresh indicator, and then so let's just get rid of these items here. So on refresh, right, we want to handle when a user clicks our screen to refresh, right, it triggers this refresh indicator. What we simply want to do is want to return vacancies dot refresh, right? Refresh, which will just refresh our vacancies. And then for the child now, want to handle for the child, we simply return the scaffold widget, right? We simply return the scaffold widget, and then we have an upper, and then the title is going to be a text. And then the text is going to be all vacancies. And then we simply have to apply a style to it. And then we'll just give this text a font weight, which is going to be font weight to bold. And then the color, which is going to be black. Right. And then after the upper, we simply have to return the body. And so the body is just going to be a column widget. Checks in a number of job properties, right? So the first one is going to be a list builder, but this list builder, we are going to put it inside an expanded widget because it expands. So if we don't put it inside an expanded widget, we'll get an error from Flutter, right? So it's going to be a list view dot builder, right? And then we need to apply physics. So physics is going to be bounce and score physics. Then we also need another property, which is item count. So for the item count, it's going to be our data, your data, and then our data.data, which is our vacancy. This data is going to be a list of our vacancy, and then dot length, the length of it, right? And then we also want shrink ref to be equal to true. All right. So for the build method, we need to create a build method which takes in a context and an index. And then we are simply going to return we're simply going to return a vacancy item widget. Vacancy item widget that we created. If you still remember, we created this widget here, vacancy item widget. It's the same as this one. It's the same as this one, this widget here. So what we are simply doing is we are simply reusing it, right? We are simply reusing it, right? So let's go into our vacancy, and then here we'll just pass in our data, the data, and then we'll then pass in the index. Then now that Now that we are done with this, what we simply need to do is after our expanded widget, right? So let's just put a semicolon here. After our expanded widget here, right here, after our dispute.builder, we need to apply this. If you still remember, we had this, we had the linear progress indicator that was appearing when items were loading, right? So we need to apply that. So to do that, we'll check if our state dot value, right? If our state dot value dot as next, right? So that means that if we still have items from our database, if we still have our items from our database, or we are simply going to check another condition, we are simply going to check if state dot is loading, that if we are still loading, and also state dot has value. So that means that if we are still loading and we still have more items in our database, the first condition is we are going to check if we still have more items from our database, right, using the as next. And then we are going to check if we're still loading our data and we still have more items from our database. If this condition is correct, right, then we need to display our linear progress indicator, right? So it's going to be linear progress indicator. So this linear progress indicator, will just give it a background color of orange. We just give it an orange color of orange, and then also make sure that we just give it some padding because we don't want it to be stuck close, right? So let's give it let's wrap it with a padding widget. So what I'm simply going to do here, I'm simply going to cut and then use padding, and then it's going to be edge insets dot all. Just make sure it's 16, and then our child is going to be the circular progress indicator, right? Our child is going to be a linear progress indicator. So right, so now I think we are done with pagination and displaying all our vacancies. So what I'm simply going to do now is I'm simply going to try and run it on our emulator, but we still have some errors. So let me check where these errors are coming from. Okay, if we go back inside our home screen here, the route name, we didn't define it, so it's going to be all vacancy screen. Right. So now let's just try to run it on our emulator and let's check if it's working. So just pull the emulator here. All right, so if we go on our CO, you can see we have this linear progress indicator down there, and you can see now of vacancies. Once we reach the limit, that means 10 vacancies, you can see there's a pause there, and then you can see more vacancies have been loaded from our database. As you can see, if we have loaded all items, this linear progress indicator is no longer appearing. So that's how you implement pagination using Flutter and Riverpod as a state management solution. So if you found this video useful, make sure you click the thumbs up button and make sure you share these videos with a friend. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.